Well, what a delight to have with me Lowell Ponte today, and I think you're going to find our conversation and our time together to be pretty inspiring. He's a co-author of a book, The Inflation Deception, 6 Ways Government Tricks Us and 7 Ways to Stop It. He also, there's a picture of it there on the screen, and he also has co-authored Crashing the Dollar. And Lowell, what a delight to have you with us today from Carlsbad, California.
Well, what an honor to be with you.
And you can get your book online, I'm assuming, at Amazon, Barnes & Noble?
You can, but in fact, if your listeners would like, we would be honored. Because you have to understand the way that Craig Smith and I came to write this book is Craig was already a wealthy, successful businessman. He'd retired. He was out on the golf course. And then one day his eyes opened and he said, you know, the country's going to hell in a handbasket for my children and grandchildren. We've got to do something. And so he and I have commenced writing a series of these books to empower people. We're not in the business of making money from the books. We're just trying to put power back in the hands of people to restore the republic, restore biblical financial values here. And so we would be happy to give your listeners absolutely free a copy of this 264-page book. We'll pay for the book. We'll pay for the postage. We'll even pay for the free phone call. We're just trying to get a list of people so as we put out future books, we can let them know that the future books are coming.
Okay, how do they get a hold of you to do that?
Well, they can get pencil and paper, but at least initially, the way is by calling 800-630-1494. That's 800-630-1494. It's a little like Columbus. It sounds almost like 1492, but not quite. It's 800-630-1494. And we may give that again before the interview is over. But the point being, we're just, as I say, trying to arm people and show them how America has been turned into an inflatocracy, a government of, by, and for inflation, where they now use deliberate inflation as a way of taxing you, taxing people who trust dollars all around the world, redistributing wealth here, doing social engineering, and so on. This is how the government largely now funds itself, by deliberately generating 5% inflation every year on average, which has the effect over 40 years of basically sucking away up to 90% of everything you earn in terms of value. And of course, inflation also, we discovered from brain research at Harvard and elsewhere, acts in the human brain very much like a drug. In fact, the pattern of someone on cocaine, on this kind of money relationship, is very similar to the brain of someone being manipulated by inflation. Whoa. If you ask, for example, someone, would they rather earn 2% in a 1% inflationary environment, or would they rather get a raise of 4% in a 5% inflationary environment? Almost everybody will take the 4% raise, not realizing that inflation eats it all up. Whereas if you get 2% in a 1% inflationary environment, at least you've gotten a real 1% raise. And so we live in a world of people thinking, oh, everything's okay. I make more dollars than my dad did. Yeah, but each of those dollars is worth less. It's worth a lot less than the dollar your dad earned. In fact, since Richard Nixon broke the last tenuous link between gold and the dollar that was preventing the politicians from printing all the money they wanted to spend, what you could buy for $1 in 1971 when Nixon did that, today costs $5.65.
Whoa.
Almost nobody's income has increased 565%. In that period of time. If you could see your money, if you were paid in inflation-adjusted dollars, you'd realize the average working American is not making any more money today than you were earning 40 years ago.
This is unbelievable. So how would you interpret what the current president has done with stimulus programs and all the other nonsense that's going on? How would you interpret all that?
Oh, you mean printing or doling out $5.5 trillion manufactured out of thin air?
Right.
Well, that has consequences. You see, politicians like to think that government can do anything, but in fact it can't. Government, for example, cannot wave a magic wand and repeal the law of gravity. I wish they could. I mean, I wouldn't have to diet as much. And likewise, they cannot repeal the equally powerful natural law of supply and demand. If you print twice as many dollars and throw them into the marketplace, all that will do is guarantee that because dollars are a commodity weighed against every other commodity, you will soon have the tomatoes in the supermarket costing twice as much.
Right.
That's all you'll do. In fact, this was one of the things that radical feminism did to America that's so interesting. It said to young women, you need to go out and get a job and work, and don't stay home with your kids after school. And so women were persuaded to do that. It sounded really good. The family would have almost twice as much money. But what they've discovered is, in the father knows best days, they could live very well on one income from dad going to work. Now they find out that they have to both go to work. They earn twice as much, but everything costs twice as much. And as a result, they're nowhere better off. But now we have a country of latchkey kids who come home to an empty house after school.
Right, right.
And people have actually gained nothing. The inflation has eaten up whatever they hope to gain from that. But now they're trapped. They're trapped because now both of them have to work to earn enough money to buy the tomatoes at the supermarket.
So this inflation situation that we're now living in actually could play into the president's hands for re-election. I mean, he's got everybody trapped.
Well, he's got them trapped, and he's playing all kinds of amusing games, amusing from a Martian economist point of view. For example, only days ago, the president handed down a cancellation of Bill Clinton's welfare reform back in 1996. That reform had said, if you're going to get welfare, you at least have to try to be getting a job. And so the president waved his magic wand and said, oh no, there is no more work requirement to get welfare. And most people said, aha, the president is engaged in getting people to come back on welfare. After all, Bill Clinton's reform shrank the welfare rolls briefly by 50%. And they're still lower than they would have been. And that's true. I mean, the government does try to make people dependent on it. But there's an even more sinister flip side of that coin. And that is the big thing Barack Obama is politically struggling against for re-election is the unemployment rate, which has stayed above 8%. Now, what happens when you say to millions of people on welfare, guess what? You don't have to apply for jobs anymore. Do people realize that after you've stopped working or applying for jobs for 4 weeks, your name is taken, you're taken off the unemployment rolls.
So you're not reported.
And yeah, and so what that means is in September and October, get ready. This is one of many scams that are going to be played on the American people. You're suddenly going to see a flood of news stories saying, hallelujah, unemployment has fallen to 7%. Barack Obama's policies have worked. The economy is saved. Everybody be joyous. The fact is, not one additional job will have been created. Not one additional person will have found work. All that will happen is they're no longer counting the people who were applying for jobs on welfare because they don't have to apply for jobs anymore. That's the real purpose of the scam. And you're going to see the phoniest numbers you've ever seen in your life about how the economy is improving. That will probably be accompanied by some kind of October surprise. Either we'll suddenly go to war in Iran or a whole bunch of other things are going to happen. My particular fear that I wrote about as a columnist at Newsmax is that we're going to see the Homeland Security agents kill a group of terrorists. That's how they'll be described. And these terrorists will have in their possession some kind of mega weapon, some proto-atomic bomb, some nerve gas, something like that, with plans to attack American cities. And when they trace down who these people are, the media will tell you they were members of the Tea Party. They were supporters of Romney. They were Christian activists.
Oh, boy.
You're going to be told that these are salt-of-the-earth people from the political right who, as the Obama administration warned from the beginning, people who love their Bibles and their guns are inherently potential terrorists and should be surveilled. This is going to be an attempt to push people away from the Tea Party in the weeks before the election. That's one scenario of many. I used to be a think tank futurist, so I used to do scenarios like this. And it's rather spooky.
What do you think, why hasn't this president been held in contempt for his illegal actions? I mean, why are they getting away with this stuff? I mean, it's just mind-boggling to me.
Well, it's interesting. This latest reform, for example, slapping aside the welfare requirement to apply for work. That's illegal, according to Robert Rector at the Heritage Foundation, but it will take months to adjudicate. And by the time somebody has finally ruled it illegal, the election will be over. The president just needs to get through the next election. And then he can condemn conservatives who have made those poor people on welfare go apply for work again. But he'll have won. he'll have been able to generate all this false news about how the economy is improving. In fact, the economy is in such a deep hole, the deepest in world history, that if you listen carefully from the bottom of that hole, you can hear the voice of Chinese on the other side asking if they will ever be paid back the more than $1 trillion that they've lent to the U.S. So that's one of the many frightening things about our economy. You know, we not only are using all kinds of odd government power and printing money, 42 cents out of every dollar the federal government now spends is borrowed. We are literally borrowing. We are borrowing money at the rate of $58,000 every second. So to people to understand what that means, count along with me. Dot, dot, dot. In those three dots, your spendaholic politicians have just put another $174,000 on the bar tab that your children and grandchildren will eventually have to pay in some form. They may pay it in taxes, they may pay it in inflation, costing the value of all the money they've saved or earned, but they're going to pay it. And the politicians just keep running that tab at a rate where, as I like to tell people, if you were using inflation-adjusted dollars, every 2 hours, our government now borrows as much money as we once spent to buy Alaska and to buy the Louisiana Purchase. In other words, every 2 hours, we borrow as much money as we once paid for the 2/3 of the United States west of the Mississippi.
Wow. Wow.
Every 2 hours. And that just keeps adding onto the tab by about $1.8 trillion a year. We're now going to top $20 trillion immediate debt in about 4 years at present rates. And there's a good question as to whether any politician has the courage to fight that, because right now, 49.1% of households in the United States receive some kind of government check. Somebody in that household gets a government check. That's half the population.
That's half the
Nearly half the population pays no income tax, which means that to them, the government is just a big machine dispensing free goodies that they think they don't have to pay for, because they don't realize that those taxes on the rich are actually being passed on to them in the form of higher prices for what they buy. Those rich people own the companies that make the things that you buy, and so it's higher prices. Ronald Reagan once brilliantly had a team of his economists when he was president analyze a simple loaf of bread. You think, what's in a loaf of bread? After all, we don't even pay sales tax on it. It's a staple food. Well, what's in a loaf of bread is 135 hidden taxes, because in its price, you're paying the property tax of the farmer, the road use tax of the trucker, the Social Security tax of the grocery store, and on and on and on. Wow. And all that gets passed on to you in higher prices.
Wow.
So everybody actually pays the tax.
Wow.
And yet, Mr. Obama has this terrific con game going. See, you think back to the history of taxation. The income tax was originally sold to people on the idea, oh, only the rich will ever pay income tax. Yeah, tell it to the half of us who now do. Then they passed the alternative minimum tax, saying, oh, this is just to get those rich people who aren't paying taxes now. Next year, if Barack Obama is reelected as part of his $3 trillion added tax burden that would come with his reelection, the alternative minimum tax is going to hit about 73 million Americans.
Let me do this.
A whole lot of, and the other thing, now he's come back a third time, like Lucy with the football.
Right.
And said, you can kick it because I want to just tax the rich, not you. Boys and girls, when the inflation flood comes, which is coming from all this spending, we're all going to be millionaires. And we're all going to be taxed like millionaires.
Yeah. We're talking about his book called The Inflation Deception, 6 Ways Government Tricks Us, 7 Ways to Stop It. There's a picture of it up there on the screen. By the way, those of you who are now watching the Dove and listening to the Dove, you can call 1-800-630-1494 to get a free copy of that book. Lowell's making that available to the Dove listeners and viewers. Again, that's 1-800-630-1494. And let them know you saw Lowell on the Dove, and they'll send you a copy of that book. Lowell, boy, you're rattling off a lot of stuff here, and you know, and I think what's so interesting, we sense it, we feel it, we know it. A lot of people, it's just way over their heads in some areas as well. But is there enough time to stop this nonsense and turn it around? And I say that with another little bit of a question here. We're all just kind of stunned what the Supreme Court did with Obamacare and how that may affect us small business people. I mean, I don't know. Can we survive this nonsense?
Oh, and you'll notice that that those taxes in Obamacare, if you look at them, a very interesting thing about them, none of them are indexed for inflation, meaning that as inflation goes up, the tax will go up. You won't be shielded by. So as the government prints more money, it's basically raising your taxes automatically by doing that. And this is one of the many sinister things we deal with. But first, let's understand just how deep this hole of debt really is. Our immediate indebtedness, $16 trillion. That's equivalent to everything we produce every year. Then on top of that, there is total national debt, meaning including private debt. That's about $67 trillion. The entire gross domestic product of planet Earth and its 7 billion people is only $62 trillion. So our debt actually exceeds the entire productivity of the planet. Then on top of that is the unfunded liability that we're already obligated to eventually pay for Social Security, Medicare, and the like. That's about $120 trillion. Then on top of that is what we call the dark matter of the universe economically, and that is derivatives. Derivatives like CDOs are basically private documents, but they're held on the books of banks all around the world as if they had real value, even though if you tried to sell them, they wouldn't. The banks in the world and governments are now, including central banks, are holding about $1.28 quadrillion worth of derivatives that are really worthless. We calculate in our book, Crashing the Dollar, Craig Smith and I, that total U.S. debt is probably in the range of $750 trillion.
Whoa.
Now, how much is $750 trillion? Imagine, if you will, Perry, that you're taking $1 bills out of your pocket and just making a stack of them on the table in front of you. A stack of 750 trillion $1 bills would stretch from here to the planet Venus, 23.5 million miles away at its closest approach, and another stack coming back, and you would still have enough dollars left over to make 14 more stacks of $1 bills between Earth and the moon. That is the real debt.
Wow.
Will we ever pay off a debt like that? Of course not. The only way you can pay off such a debt is just by turning on the printing press and printing almost limitless amounts of money, which we've been doing slowly, but we'll soon be doing it much faster. And add to that, we have on the economy, as if we could get out of this by growth, here's why we can't. One of the two major political parties is basically now a hostile to business, hostile to capitalism party. Mm-hmm. And what that means is that we have what in our book we call donkey drag on the economy. The drag of the Democratic Party just being there, just being a potential winner of some near future election, tells business people, don't you dare be foolish enough to invest or hire people. Because as soon as the Democrats come back in, they'll find a way of taking your money away from you. Far better to buy that new yacht, far better to move your money offshore. And that's what companies are now doing. Remember Ayn Rand wrote that book, Atlas Shrugged. It was about the productive people, the people who pull the wagon that everybody else wants to ride in for free. Yeah. They go on strike in this novel, which was written back in, the 1950s. Well, we're seeing that happening right now. You're seeing U.S. companies and banks holding back on their books about $3 trillion that they will not use to hire, they will not use to expand their company until they see how this election comes out. And if Barack Obama wins this election, that money may never be seen again. It'll be over in another country. And this is part of the challenge we face. There will be no way to grow out of this. And so the question I ask my Democrat friends is, when you finally succeeded in killing free enterprise, what kind of enterprise do you think will be left? And the answer is it will either be crony capitalism, just all money goes to the people who are friends of the ruling political party or whatever. That's what we're now seeing, for example, with Obama's green energy program, where 80% of the government money is going to companies that had major contributors to the Democratic Party in it. And that's billions and billions of dollars being funneled of your tax dollars to companies, basically creating these circles like labor unions, where the labor union is given money, it kicks the money back to the Democratic politicians, who then give the labor union even more power to take money from unwilling workers and so on. So it's a machine, as we see the Chicagoization of the United States going on here.
Lowell, does any Democrats see the path we're on? I mean, what is the motivation for them to drive this thing into the ditch the way they're going?
Well, this is where my co-author Craig Smith and I have an honest difference of opinion. He is a devout Christian who wants to think the best of everyone. He believes President Obama is just hardworking and trying to do his best and trying to make the country better. I, on the other hand, was for 15 years the science editor at Reader's Digest. And I look at the situation and I say, if somebody flips a quarter and it comes up tails every time, you know that this isn't just random chance. You know, if somebody were trying to make the country better and just doing a bad job of it, every once in a while they do something accidentally that just happened to help the country. But what we've seen from the Obama administration is every single action is designed to damage capitalism, to strengthen the welfare state, to make government bigger. In 3 years, he has gone from the federal government controlling 19.5% of the U.S. economy to today, where the federal government controls about 25% of the U.S. economy. In other words, in 3 years, he has made government relative to the economy 25% bigger. Mm-hmm. We now live in a country where twice as many people work for government as work in all of manufacturing combined. And his only statement is, oh, the private sector is doing fine with its 14 to 18% real unemployment and underemployment. But government needs more money because we might have to fire some government workers. Actually, under President Obama, the federal government workforce has gotten bigger by 14.2%. And those federal workers, by the way, the average federal worker earns $126,000 in wages and long-term benefits.
Wow. All right, so, boy, you got so much here. How could we possibly stop this and turn it around? I mean, let's fast forward. I realize it's a little hypothetical, but let's fast forward a little bit. What if Romney gets elected? I mean, can he actually do anything?
Well, the first thing he would do, and probably the most important thing, John Maynard Keynes was wrong about a lot of things. Keynesian stimulus, we now know, doesn't really work at all. In fact, it makes things worse. But Romney being there, Keynes said capitalism to work needs animal spirits. Animal spirits meaning optimism, meaning a willingness to gamble, to take chances, to invest, to put your capital at risk.
Right.
Now, President Obama, as I indicated, has basically crushed the animal spirits of capitalism by threatening to bleed the cap. See, President Obama talks about taking the wealth from the wealthy. That isn't what he's taking. The wealthy are the capitalists in the country. They're the ones who invest in new enterprises, in hiring people, in making new jobs. So he's really bleeding out the capital, which is the lifeblood of capitalism. It's the seed corn from which future jobs and future things will be made. And he wants all of that diverted to the government, which doesn't really make anything, except war. So we're taking the money from the productive sector and moving it to the unproductive sector of society, and then wondering why things aren't better. Now, the mere election of Mitt Romney would send a message to everyone in the country that capitalism is back, that you can be free to enterprise again. Even Romney doesn't have to lift a finger, actually. It's just that sheer optimism will take some of this $3 trillion that's now on the sidelines and bring it back to expanding American business again, to hiring people.
Right.
So even if Romney can't enact an immediate repeal of Obamacare, for example, the economy will get dramatically better just because the donkey drag of having Democratic control of the government now, that will vanish.
Okay.
Or if not vanish, at least it'll recede to a future election.
With this decision of the Supreme Court, and even if Romney was able to do away with Obamacare, that ruling in the Supreme Court still sits there. How damaging is that?
Well, it sits there, and it actually creates a rather frightening precedent. But that doesn't mean that Obamacare can't be defunded.
Okay, all right.
And by defunding it, you can largely defang it. So there are things that can be done. My concern is that the average politician in a world where half the people are getting a government check or benefit of some kind is they'll be afraid to do anything. Remember, by the time the baby boom has retired, more than 60% of people in the country will be receiving a government check. And at that point, I don't know what's left of democracy. I mean, as Ben Franklin said, the moment people discover they can vote themselves benefits out of the public treasury, you can kiss democracy goodbye.
Lowell, I only got a couple minutes left. Let me ask you this. President Obama is a very young man. He's never run a business. I can't believe that he is this smart. So he must have a team of people behind him that are really unwinding this country. And he's not that smart to sit down and write line for line of Obamacare. Who is behind him? Who's the brains behind all of this?
Oh, the George Soroses and so on. Soros has said, for example, and this is a high multi-billionaire investor, the man who destroyed the British pound at one point and took pride in having wrecked the British economy. George Soros has said that the United States is the most dangerous entity in the world because we're just too powerful. Our military is too powerful. Our arrogance is too powerful. We need to be brought down to the level of a France or a Germany. And of course, you're seeing President Obama disarm the U.S. as fast as he can. He's just implemented a program where if you want to be a U.S. astronaut today, and this was made public by the first major woman astronaut of the U.S., every U.S. astronaut trainee is now required to learn to speak Russian. We used to think that in a future Starship Enterprise, they'd be speaking the language English, and the captain would be named Kirk. No, the captain's going to be the Russian guy on board there, and they'll be speaking Russian. That's already been implemented within NASA.
Wow. Lowell, thank you. I'd love to keep tabs with you and have you back often and see how we go as we get close to this. I read an article in the Wall Street Journal this morning that supports what you said, and that is, what if Romney's election, what will your $500,000 investment be the next day? And it was a pretty positive note.
Oh, it would be vastly positive. The kind of thing that we deal with in the inflation deception, which is why I hope people will get the free book post-pay. We pay for all of it. It won't cost you a penny. Is, for example, we are now seeing the systematic killing off of the sons and daughters of the American pioneers.
Right.
Because American exceptionalism is not just an idea. It actually exists genetically. Scientists have actually found a gene called a D47 dopamine receptor allele in people here that you can call an entrepreneurial gene. It's a questing gene. In human history, only 2% of people have ever left the place they were born to move to another place seeking opportunity or adventure. But America is full of people like that. We are the people who carry that gene, and yet Barack Obama is now turning America into the country that our ancestors fled from in Europe and so on. And that is causing stress of the sons and daughters of our pioneers because they carry that gene. It's like they're being put in prison. And that stress is coming out as cancer, as heart attacks, as infertility, as suicide. In other words, this is an undue stress pressure being put specifically on the people who built this country by government policy today, and it's literally killing our future unless we can reverse it. And the book has 50 pages of ways we can reverse it, and in an emergency, you can at least save yourself, your family, and your life savings. There are ways to do that.
All right, get a copy of it. It's free. Lowell's making that available. Call 1-800-630-1494 and let the folks know that you saw Lowell on theDove, and he'll send you a copy of The Inflation Deception, absolutely free. He'll even pay the freight. Thank you, Lowell, for offering that to our viewers and listeners. And blessings to you. We'll get you back soon, and we'll carry on the conversation, okay?
Well, God bless America, and God bless us, everyone. Thank you, Perry, for having the courage to keep people informed.